All right. So, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon when you're seeing this lecture. This is lecture number 9, but it comes out of chapter 12 out of the book. We don't have to follow a particular order as it relates to my lectures. And I would never in class say this is now lecture number 8 or number 4. Or I just do lecturing. But because it's all online and it's going to be placed on Facebook and our other page, you have to say, what lecture is this? So this is number 9. We're going to be discussing domestic violence in this short lecture, and not it's in this lecture. What is it? How it operates? What are some of the laws that are taking place in our country? And as it relates to immigration and race, as it relates to that. So what is domestic violence? Domestic violence is a pattern of abuse with the goal of gaining control and power over the victim, which is always going to be an intimate partner. Domestic abuse can take place within a marriage. It can take place you're cohabitating. It can take place between heterosexuals. It can take place between same-sex relationships. It is not limited to a particular class, race, ethnicity, or gender, right? And so we begin to see, but with all that being the case, there are domestic abuse cases in which you find women abusing men. That does take place also. But for the large majority of domestic violence that takes place in the USA, it is almost always perpetrated men versus women. In the 1970s, we start seeing a spike in more reporting of domestic violence because in 1970, we see the beginning of the women's right movement. And so as women are demanding, which they should demand, more rights in the workplace, in the home, in society, they are saying, we're not going to put up with this. So they start making more reports of domestic violence. In 1983, there were only 700 shelters in the U.S. So imagine only 700 shelters in the whole entire country to take care of this issue. So it really wasn't on the forefront of our country. And just imagine you might find 700 grocery stores in one state, right? I don't know how many grocery stores there would be in Iowa or Minnesota, but imagine only 700 shelters in the whole entire country to take on this issue. In 1992, the Surgeon General declared that domestic violence was the leading cause of injury to women between the ages of 15 to 44. So you got to think about this for a second. The leading cause to violence in this country for women who are ages 15 to 44 is domestic violence. It wasn't car accidents. It wasn't slipping and falling. It wasn't workplace accidents. It was literally someone abusing someone else, which I find that to be atrocious. In 1994, we have the Women's, what is this called? The Women Violence Against Women Act, which acted somewhat like the Civil Rights Bill of 1964. And so I think that was a really good thing that took place. But again, the idea of having to write legislation to protect people who are American citizens seems odd to me. As an anthropologist, you would think that you would want to have your society members protected all the time, but it actually doesn't work out that way. So here's some of the reasons why we continue to have domestic assault take place. Whether we like it or not, we do live in a society of toxic masculinity, what it means to be a man. So this goes back to my lecture on gender and gender roles, right? And so a major part of domestic violence is a psychological phenomena that takes place in the mind where you believe you have to control other people through the use of force or financially. It's always a physical or financial abuse. We also understand that shelters in most shelters can shelter one parent and multiple kids for up to 60 days. Right, so for up to 60 days, they can be sheltered, but to find a home takes anywhere from 6 to 10 months, which you can see those two numbers don't equal out. Returning back to the abuser, there's a 98% chance that when people return back to an abusive home, that it has to do with not being able to support themselves financially, 98% of the time. So that's that part there. The part on same-sex relationships, the domestic violence is not higher or lower, but it's pretty much the same. So 1 in every 4 couples, whether they are heterosexual or homosexual, will encounter some sort of abuse. And again, with these types of numbers, we have to stop and ask ourselves, what are we actually teaching and training our kids how to navigate relationships with other individuals as it relates to intimacy? A lot of times, police officers in departments will confuse same-sex couples for roommates and not make an arrest, which is not okay. There was a study here in Minnesota called the Sherman-Burke study, and out of that study, we have mandatory arrest policies, which requires an arrest to happen in the scene of a domestic violence incident. So if you're a police officer in the state of Minnesota currently, and you go to a home where you recognize there's been domestic violence, you will make an arrest. So I remember as a police officer thinking that this was inappropriate. There's no discretion. Why are police officers being forced to do these things? But now I recognize, right after the blindness has been peeled from my eyes, that literally Minnesota has one of the strongest domestic violence policies, and it also is very high as it relates to domestic violence being curbed and even being stopped. Because I believe that in most cases, we're looking at an education issue of how people were raised and how people actually were raised to deal with other individuals. Again, so this is a really good thing. What else? Dual arrest. You can do a dual, very rarely where you see dual arrest, especially if there are kids in the home, right? And so then there needs to be some sort of discretion in 90% of the cases, if it's a man and a woman and they both hit on each other and there are kids there, there's a high probability that the male will be arrested and taken out of the home. And it is what it is. I'm not arguing that's good, that's bad. In most cases for domestic violence, and there's been what I call, or what's been called, mutual violence, and there are kids in the home, the mother will also be given a tab to show for court, but won't be arrested. How do you prosecute this? And so in Minnesota, it becomes very easy. And so I'm going to stick within the construct of Minnesota as it relates to the lecture of domestic violence. Number one, we have a mandatory arrest policy, and we also have you don't need a victim to arrest someone on domestic violence. And so what that means, if you show up and you see someone who's been bleeding and you have determined that there is domestic violence in this situation, the arrest can be made. And it used to be if there was no victim, there's no crime, and that's now changed. So if there's enough evidence, right, that points to domestic violence, you can still be arrested and convicted without there being a victim's voice being used. And I find this to be a very good thing because with our very strong policy as it relates to domestic violence, we've literally, in Minnesota, have seen the rate of domestic violence literally lower, and we've seen those that have been perpetrators of domestic violence get the help that they actually need to become better citizens. And so again, it is a teaching moment. How do you teach someone not to use their hands, but to use their words and not to use manipulating techniques as in controlling money? So that's that. So the ideal of immigration and domestic violence. So there are less reports reported for domestic violence based upon immigration and those types of things because undocumented people don't want to be arrested. So it tends to be higher numbers within undocumented individuals. People don't want their kids being removed from them. And so we need to take a look at how do we protect people who are in our country um, without creating more harm to them. So that's something that we need to take a look at. But again, there the Violent Act Against Women does address immigration status, and it also protects them, but not to the highest degree if you're a citizen. And so this isn't a debate on whether you should be in this country or not. Yes, you should. No, you shouldn't. This has more to do with you are literally the victim of abuse, and because you're not documented, then we're going to punish you for not being documented as we're trying to take care of you or prosecute those that are abusing you. It doesn't seem to make sense. So it doesn't. There's not a great deal of help for those that are undocumented as it relates to domestic assault. So that's something we need to take a look at, and that is the lecture for today. Hopefully, everyone is doing well. And I will also give you the question of the day. So the question of the day, which would be, I think, question of the day number 9. What should we do as it relates to domestic violence and undocumented people here in Minnesota? So let's say that. So what new policy should we create? And if you want to take a look at the Violence Act, the Violence Against Women Act, go ahead and do so. But what is your view on undocumented individuals in this country who are experiencing abuse? What should our policies be? Should it be that as we're investigating domestic assault, we recognize or we find out that you're undocumented, so then we just stop the investigation and we send you to ISIS? Or do we do the whole entire process, making sure that these types of things don't take place again? Oh, I just had a thought pop in my head, but maybe one of you will share it. But as the question was coming out of my mouth, what should we do with undocumented individuals who are experiencing domestic assault? The answer kind of popped in my head, and maybe I'll share what I think should take place if someone comes forward and says, I'm being abused, and during that investigation, you find out that they are undocumented, what could be a solution to take care of making them a citizen and also taking care of the abusive situation that they're in? Take care. Peace.